I talk for a second?
Excursion into
Coaching. All right, here we are talking about coaching, and I'm talking about coaching with Ruth Cooper-Dickson. It's such a pleasure to have you here, Ruth.
Thank you, Yannick, for having me. I'm very excited.
Well, this was born out of a very inspiring story that I've heard through you, and I really wanted this to be out there in some way. And then when you were saying, oh, I'm going to be presenting at this conference and, I've got 10 minutes and what do I do? The idea was born that maybe we offer a little follow-up for people who wanted to hear more of the story.
Absolutely, yeah. Deeper dive.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited to hear that story. I heard some of that story. I'd love to dive more into it. Mm-hmm. And the essence of it is that you just went out to approach something that you've always felt some passion for, which is music. And then you ended up working with professional classical musicians. Yeah. And it's been a wild ride. So I'd say maybe give people a bit of a sense for who you are, kind of where you're coming to from at this. And then I just love to hear the story. And if you don't mind, I'll kind of jump in between to just dig a little deeper on certain things.
No, that's absolutely great. Well, thank you for having me. So for those who are listening or watching back, you might not know me. So I'm Ruth Cooper-Dickson. I'm a positive psychology practitioner. I did the MAP-CP program a while back now.
That's the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology.
It is, yes, at UEL, University of East London. And my specialist area of research is post-traumatic growth. And as a coach, I created something called Thrivership Coaching, which is basically working in that, I suppose, grey area. I always describe myself as a coach with broad shoulders. So it's not counselling and therapeutic work. It's very much in the trauma-informed space. And over the years, since being qualified, I've run various coaching programs which have been really I suppose quite deep in the trauma-informed space. So supporting women who'd experienced domestic abuse and violence, and had a team of volunteer professional coaches, a lot of alumni from UEL, and that ran for 4 years and did some fabulous, great work. And I was also a coach and a team coach for humanitarian aid workers out in the field. I supported several NGOs out in Europe as well. So again, really working with people who were experiencing often vicarious trauma themselves and coaching them through those spaces, and also making sure they were protecting their own resilience and well-being in a very kind of unique environment. And I work with corporates mostly in my day-to-day job. I do a lot of mental health and well-being consultancy programs. That is generally what I do for my bread and butter, but I end up supporting people through coaching who are navigating grief, loss, bereavement, resilience, adversity, all the life struggles that we have. That is kind of where I often thrive, and that's where I love being. And I suppose, though, one thing which had come up for me, particularly in our supervision, Yannick, was often that work is, it is, as much as it's very rewarding and I'm really passionate about it, it can be really heavy to hold that. And
for sure.
I suppose, the passion is there, but not always are those coaching sessions fun. Obviously they're not going to be. They're, and I came into classical music myself from my own journey of mental ill health. I found it really cathartic as a self-care tool. I'm a huge movie nerd and love soundtracks and music scores. And I never put those two together as classical music, because I'm not a musician. I'm not, I never had a never learned to play an instrument at school apart from the recorder. Which I think
recorder.
everyone in the UK learns to play that at school, in primary school. It's a thing. Did you not know that?
It's a recorder. Is that a kind of flute? The little we call it blockflöte. Yeah. I used to play that too.
In assembly. I think every child is forced to play that at some point. But I never, that wasn't my world. And it's funny because I've been since told that movie soundtracks and scores are often the gateway drug to classical music, because it's often, if you're not from that world, it's something that lots of people resonate with, that they love. They get to know a movie, or even now gaming. Gaming has its own show on Classic FM because of the scores and the soundtracks that are created for video games.
Well, it carries so much emotion.
Absolutely. So I had this huge love of classical music, and I joined the Royal Philharmonic Society because I wanted to deepen that knowledge. So I joined actually as a corporate member a year ago, because I'd stopped all the voluntary pro bono work I was doing. And for me, it was just a lovely thing to do as an organisation, to give something back to a community, particularly where we know arts are massively cut and defunded in education systems in the UK particularly, but I know globally that's also an issue. And I just thought it was a network, a community that would be new to me. And I kind of always thrive in finding these new communities and being curious and exploring them. So that was kind of like where it started, and my connection into classical music. And then last year I went to IPA, so the International Positive Psychology Association. That is how that's IPA.
That's the global conference.
Yeah, the World Congress in Brisbane last July, this time coming up for last year. And two things were surprising on the conference timetable. There was a symposium around classical music, particularly around how classical music had healed, had brought the outcome of post-traumatic growth for communities that had experienced natural disaster. So it was like a flood case study, and the research that had been done. And so that was really fascinating to see how music had really played a part in that healing journey and recovery.
And was coming together to listen to it? Or
and performers. And performances as well. And then I also got to hear Dr. Sarah Aseno, who's a clinical psychologist with the Royal Northern College of Music. And she presented some research that she'd been doing around supporting classical musicians. And there was some work around performance anxiety and the work that she'd been doing in her space as a clinical psychologist. And I remember sitting there in this conference and it was literally the light bulb moment. I was in the main room, in the main auditorium, watching one of these symposiums. And I thought, I wonder if the Royal Philharmonic Society would be up for something like a coaching program. I literally just had that thought from nowhere. And so I came back in July. I do think this is how I approach the charity for the domestic abuse as well. And people are often they're really taken aback, because my enthusiasm when I'm like so excited about something. And
You're laughing about it?
Yeah, I literally emailed them, and I was like, "Hi, I've just got back from the World Congress, and I saw all these great research studies. So I'm thinking I could give you a pilot program for classical musicians on positive psychology coaching." And they were a bit what? Sorry, you want to offer us stuff for free? I mean, that's literally often the case, right? And and I said, yeah, it'd be great. And so,
just a quick question: how long did it take you? I mean, I get the excitement because I also often work in that way. There's a burst of excitement, and sometimes I just kind of initiate something, and sometimes they go places, and sometimes they don't. But I think a lot of, not just coaches, people in general often get stuck by thinking everything through and thinking they have to design a brochure first and get a program together. And because it sounds like it came out of a burst, and it was probably pretty quick to just write to them.
Yeah, it did. Like I did it the minute I got back. I didn't even really think about it. I just had this concept of an idea. And I think as I've had, as you will know, but I've had a business now for 11 years. It's grown through various iterations of it. And I think as an entrepreneur, there's so much, isn't there, out there about having an idea and just running with it, and the idea of failing fast as well, and not being afraid to kind of go for something and see. There's obviously always risks with that, but also if I find that if I'm excited about something, I've got the momentum for it, I'm better doing it there and now, and just kind of like making it happen. And I think that's one thing about my energy and my enthusiasm is when I'm really passionate about something, I will make it happen. And they jumped on a Zoom call with me, the RPS did, and they were just absolutely this is great, thank you. And I suppose when you don't have, if I was a trillionaire or a billionaire, or a millionaire even, all the money that I would give to charity and to organizations. But I think there's something really powerful about actually donating your own time and skills to something. And that can even be more rewarding because it's, great. You can get to see if you've got the, obviously if you've got the money, you can have lots of things that you can be investing in and making stuff happen and really changing people's lives. And I say changing people's lives, and I've just thought about that, and it does sound really, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like, oh, you're changing people's lives. But having seen the results of this coaching program and the feedback that I've had, like, you are changing people's lives, right? Even by volunteer, I volunteer at my local park run. I know me turning up as a volunteer when they're short or making park run happen means that it changes people's lives. Yeah, it doesn't have, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, grandiose. It doesn't have to be that. And so with the RPS, I basically said, look, I've got this idea. I've run pro bono coaching programs before. Why don't we do something for 6 months? And also basically said, look, I don't expect you to, because I think often this also happened with the charities I've worked with over the years on the social enterprises, that often there's a fear that they're going to be left holding all the work and that they're stretched and don't have the resources it is. So I made it very clear at the start this was going to be my program with their partnership, really. All I needed was the introduction to the musicians.
Make it very clear there won't be any work involved.
Yeah, there was. I mean, there hasn't been any work involved for them at all, really, in this. So all they did was go and find the people that would take part in the program. And we came up with the idea that we would have 6, because I thought that was manageable for my own time to do 6 coaching sessions once a month for 6 months. And that was possible. And it also felt like a nice number. And then they basically chose or went out to people who'd worked with the RPS before in the past. So they'd been on either some of their programs, whether that be their composer program or whether they'd received grants or scholarships or anything like that. So they'd already had that connection, and it was kind of, I suppose, building on their career. So it felt a nice way to be able to do that. And all the people they asked really were up for it. I sent out, I was given the introduction on email, and then I sent out almost a bit of a coaching contract, like overview and what to expect, because none of these people had any formal coaching before. They'd had, some of them had come through formal education of music, so through a conservatoire. Some hadn't, but none of them had any form of coaching. Some had therapy before, but again, very different. And the way that I structured it was, I was going to do a group intro to get everyone together to kind of explain as a group what this was about, so they could see a few others as well that were able to make it to kind of connect.
They were not connected with each other, right? They were from similar circles, but they're not playing music together.
A couple knew each other, but majority didn't really know each other. There was composers in this. Out of the 6, there was composers. There was there were singers and instrumentalists as well. So a real broad mix of individuals, different backgrounds, different experiences. So that made it really rich as well. And so, yeah, we kicked off in October and so it all happened really quick. So I came back mid-July, got everything all set up throughout late July, early August. The intro letter sort of went out to them all. They agreed to be a part of it. So then the coaching contract initially went. And also I asked them to do strengths, because I thought that might be what I found with the domestic abuse and violence program that I ran, coaching program, and the women's program I ran. Strengths was just a lovely introduction for anyone who was kind of new to coaching, who wasn't sure like what exactly they were going to be using it for initially. Like sometimes I think people have they seek you out as a coach because they need help with X, but I think being on this program, they weren't necessarily sure what they would discuss in coaching or what coaching would be about. So I figured that strengths can be a really nice way to hold that first session, to have them to talk about something or to reflect on a part of themselves.
How did you pitch it then, right? Because often coaching programs are pitched for a particular outcome, or, and that is a dilemma, right? Because we know that it can lead to all sorts of different outcomes, but it really depends on what people are bringing. And with a diverse group like that, and given that you don't really know what they will be bringing, how did you make it attractive?
I think I put on the letter that this could be used for anything that they felt they wanted to walk through in terms of their own musical career, where they're at, but also it could be used for building resilience, mitigating burnout, looking at their own well-being. Like it wouldn't be focused on their performance. It wouldn't be skills based, obviously, because I'm not a musician, I'm not a musical teacher or from that world. So it was very much about supporting their own positive well-being and kind of encouraging that. And interestingly, in the evaluation, one person did say, and I wasn't sure what I was going to be talking about in each session, but every session they found something that they would be working on. So it was very much held around, this is an opportunity to look at your strengths as well and to build resilience coping strategies for further on in your career. Although they were all very different, they were all at a very similar career trajectory. Like they've been in there, it's been a couple of years, between maybe 1 and 2 or 3 years since they've finished a lot of their studies, for the majority anyway. So they were kind of at that point where their careers are really getting into flow now, and that point of like, what, how do I manage this? What does this look like? So yeah, I think they weren't sure either what was going to come out of it, and to be honest, neither was I.
Exciting.
I mean,
but you don't need to know for something like this to run and get welcomed.
I think that was part of it. It was that I didn't need to be the expert in their field. And I think for me to go into a world that was so alien, so I'm so used to working in law firms or insurers or any kind of corporate environment. And yet I love the challenge as a coach of going into environments where, like humanitarian aid work, that's completely different field, or knowing someone's coming to coaching with the women's program, that they're coming with trauma that's very open and they're aware of, and what they could be navigating live as well, and situations like that. So I think as a coach, I really thrive in being able to do that. And one thing that I've put in my presentation for next week is, for me, it's been about the coaching way of being, not not what tools I'm bringing to the coaching session. It's about how I show up as a coach. And never sure where each session with each individual is going to go, because it just depends on what their obviously their career and where they're at, and how that might shift quite quickly if a rehearsal's happening or a performance is happening, or they've been asked to do something that's really out their comfort zone, or so all of that means that you can't really, for me, it's very different to someone who's working in a office environment, you know, doing a corporate career role. It's very different. You're dealing also with in some ways there's similarities, but they're very people, you know, when we talk about everyone, it can be creative. You don't have to be a musician or you know, work in the arts to be creative, but these are people that make a career from being creative. And so that brings in itself some of the challenges that came out of the sessions were reconciling making money for art, and also how sustainable is that, and you know, a lot of the sessions across the board were using your career as making money from performing and having, but also having that as a separate part of you, which is also a business. And that for them is very alien. You know, they've not come through business school, for example, or you're not necessarily taught those things, or that they weren't. I think things are changing, but they weren't taught, you know, so things like how to be on social media as an artist.
Yeah, nowadays it's such a big part of it.
Yeah.
Right? That you already have a following, and it's less about the quality of your art, and a lot comes in about the business and entrepreneurial aspects of being an artist. And I mean, some artists, they still have a position where they can just perform, right? And they're being given an audience. But I think a lot of artists find themselves, especially at those paramount time, a couple of years into the career, where they're like, oh, this is a thing now. But now you need to kind of also manage your brand and things like that.
Yeah.
Are often very alien to artists, right?
Yeah. And also, I think classical music, I've been in enough spaces now within the RPS and networking and workshops with the RPS, which has really developed my own as a understanding, but as a music lover, but recognizing that classical music in itself is it's such a different genre compared to other forms of music, because it's so steeped in tradition, and in some ways it wants to be inclusive, but also it has all of these kind of you know, upper class and kind of barriered ways to kind of get to it. I remember that I went to my first classical music concert on my own in 2025 last year. Yeah, was it last year or even the year before, 2024? And not knowing how do you behave in a classical, like when do you clap, when don't you clap, all of those things, which is really weird. Like it's, and kind of everything's laid out for you, so you know what to expect with a classical music concert. And like, you go and watch, I don't know, Harry Styles or Taylor Swift in a pop concert, you might know the set list, but they change it all up, right? But you don't generally know what's going. Oh, that's my favorite, you know. But with the classical music, they're like, this is the repertoire. This is what we're going to play today, and it's, you know, in advance of sitting down in the audience, like generally what to expect. So it's really interesting as someone who's not from that world, and you can see why it can be quite excluding for some people to think that how do you know what's going to happen, like what's going off, how everything works. It can be, I think, off-putting for people to attend those types. So and then there's also a lot steeped with identity with musicians. I feel that, like, showing up on social media, how much am I allowed to be, you know, we talk about being our authentic selves on social media, but if I'm sharing some vulnerabilities about my performance or nervousness or anxiety, like what does that say about people who might want to book me? Or other people, other peers, and what other people think. And there's a lot of that still, because what I also wasn't aware of is kind of like their education system and the belief system that's quite entrenched early on. And encouraging them to, well, like for me to be able to say as a coach, as an outsider, which was really powerful, to be able to say, well, why do you have to do it that way? Who says? I'm like, what you mean I can do it a different way? And that was like one of the biggest things that I used to be, do you have to do it that? Why do you have to do it that way? I don't know. I've just always been told, well, can you change that? And I remember there was one session, and we really focused on we've been working on confidence quite a bit, and confidence is a skill. I mean, these are incredible, some of them have been to the best performing arts schools in the world, or conservatoire in the world. And I was talking about
confidence is multi-layered. It's not just about the confidence, about the actual skill.
It's and they did the concert how they want how they wanted to do it, and they came off stage for a bit, and they went back on and they were just buzzing, and they were like, I did it how I wanted to do it, and it was so good. And I was like, and no one died, and everyone thought it was great. And yeah, just really working with that whole connection to audience as well. I think one thing that was really good for me as a coach is because I'm such a music lover, and somebody who goes to a classical music concert who doesn't have, oh, that note was off key or something like that. So I was able to say, oh, this really resonated with me as an audience member. And when the musician took time to explain why this piece was so important to them, and how they expected me to perhaps to embody the music, or what I might take from it, or to be aware of this, and that kind of storytelling, and really encouraging that for them to own that. Because I think, again, there's often the barrier between them as a musician and the audience, and like how they're trying to connect. And I was able to kind of do that from somebody who pays money. I said, I've just spent £200 on proms tickets, right? I've just spent that money because I want to go and listen to me. I'm there to watch to listen, and I don't know if something's going to be off if someone plays a wrong note. Like, by the time it's happened anyway, I've missed it, right? So I think there's something about them. They're often, it's like they have the people who book them, the concert organizers, the people who gatekeep all of that world for their careers. But then also there's an audience who some have been musicians themselves, I'm sure, but there's a big part of people that just love to listen to classical music, right? And engage with it.
So you're also, part of your role as a coach is also to give voice to your experience as someone from the outside.
I don't think one of the big themes that's come out of this is the fact I'm an outsider. And I think that has been so interesting in this industry, to be an outsider, because they've been able to say the things that they wouldn't say to anybody else. And I do think this is because it is such an insular world, and music, like all industries, can be, once you get into them, can be quite small, right? People know each other, but I feel that they can say, they've been able to say, and they have said this in the evaluations, that they can say whatever they want to me without any fear of come back, in the sense of it's going to damage their career or limit their career.
That's the beauty of an external coach being involved.
Absolutely.
And the value of it, because they're from the outside and you can share things because they're not coming in. Even if they do some more coaching, they always remain outside.
Yeah. So I think that's been one of the biggest things for them. And they've never had that experience before. And they did say, like, all the way through, my feedback has been
because I think that's helpful for people to know, right? You gathered extensive feedback on this process, because it was pro bono, so you could actually gather some data. And it's not just that you hear them say that during the session, but also there's been a formal process of evaluation.
Well, that was it. So we started off with the group session, and going back to the start. So we started off with the group session, and that was just an introduction to that, for them to feel comfortable and to kind of get them thinking about their first session. So I sort of said, one of the things that come up in our supervision was, what's their relationship with their instrument? What does that mean to them? And if that's where they wanted to go, or they could use that. We would definitely talk about their strengths. If that came up in the first session, we'd do some introductions to each other as well. And they could tell me whatever they felt that was important for them right now and what they were navigating. And there was no structure to it, basically. So they could come as free as they wanted to. And so that was the group session. And then every month we had the one-to-one. And sometimes with diaries, more them, if they were traveling or in performances, we'd leave it a little bit. Or sometimes, as with coaching, you perhaps needed a bit of time for them to go away and do the work as well. So it might be a couple of months. I think the longest was about 2 months we left it. But we've all bar one who's just had to reschedule from this week. All the sessions were done. So all 6 sessions were done. All of them have completed an evaluation. So I got them to complete a self-report evaluation about their experience. I got them to rate themselves on a clarity and confidence scale before and after, and then any testimonials or anything else they wanted to provide. And we had a group closing session, which the majority again made, and we recorded that. And it was so lovely because they got to chat to each other about the same themes that were coming up. And then all the way through the coaching, what I did do was make some very high level notes after each session, which was just basically what they bought, what I observed, and anything that they were taking away or any homework. So it just kind of gave me just very high level bullet points just to see what the themes were across the board. And it was incredible because their rising confidence and in clarity across the group the mean went from 5.2 to 8.7 in the self-report.
That's quite impactful.
Yeah. And I am like, honestly.
And for those people listening to this, you should go on YouTube and see Ruth. It's like full of, this is beautiful.
They said my enthusiasm. You know me, I'm enthusiastic. I think that's why people don't know how to say no. When I turned up, I'm like, let's do this project. Yeah. They're like, okay, let's go for it. And they are blown away. But the RPS have been so lovely back to me, and I think they've just really loved someone coming into their community who's not from classical music industry, who's just not a musician, who just thinks it's the best thing ever, and just like so enthusiastic about everything. And I've watched 2 of them perform now. I saw one perform quite recently, and one of them we'd really worked on confidence as well, and I watched them perform, and I also met their mum afterwards, and their mum was like, they've changed so much in confidence. And I'm like, that's them, not me. They've done the work. But it's just been an absolute joy. I've never once thought, and I'm being super honest, I think we all have this with all jobs that we do. There's always a time when you sit down and you think, right, I've got a coaching client, get in the head, get in the game, and I've got this on today. But I've never had that with every session. I've been really excited to come to it, every coaching session. And I think it is because it's so different from everything else I do. And it's been a real add-on, and it's allowed me to express creativity and to have fun with it, and to not be kind of caught up in the coaching from a corporate perspective. And it's given me a different dimension to how I want to coach as well, and taught me lots about myself as well. I think.
What did it teach you?
I think it's taught me that I can, reflecting on it, that I can make anything happen I want. I think it's reinforced that I really thrive in those creative environments, and that it's taught me that actually by having a project like this or working in a space that is okay financially, it hasn't given me anything from a return on investment perspective, but from a qualitative and coaching way of being, that's gone through the roof. And it's given me such a richness and knowledge of classical music. I was at last night the UK's first UK recorded music disability and neurodiversity mixer, social summer mixer. So all the recorded record labels, your Warners, Virgin, Universal, all of those were all together for a mixer. And I met the contact who invited me. I met at the Royal Philharmonic Society Awards back in March. By chance, we were taking photos by, the fancy board where you have your social post. And we got talking, and I was explaining about what I was doing. And they invited me to this. They said, oh, we're going to be having a mixer. So I went to it last night. And it was so cool to be able to say to these people from really cool record labels, and they're like, oh, what do you do? And, I'm like, oh, I coach classical musicians in positive psychology, but all around positive psychology. And they're like, wow, what's that all about? And I could actually talk about it. And I'd never been invited into that room last night. I went all the way to London for this really cool event and met some really cool people. And ended up talking to somebody who was a former classical musician, parents classical musicians, husband is, and was also really interested from a coaching angle what this was about. And they work at one of the labels. And it was just really like the richness of like doing something a bit fun and different. And it's not like, it's a completely different world.
Yeah. And I mean, you're saying it didn't pay you money, right? But if I look at this from a business perspective, this investment made total sense, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it was Steve Chandler who said once, oh, I realized I'm not in the coaching business, I'm in the relationship business. And, most coaching work gets created through relationships, through conversations, through showing up in spaces, being able to talk to people and, who can experience your presence and your curiosity and your energy and your questions. And, when we have conversations, somebody's like, oh, positive psychology, that's really interesting. Tell me more or less.
Yeah.
So what's that about? Then you can talk about something that, you show up passionate and energetic, and you say some interesting things that make them think about things that they hadn't before.
Yeah.
And whenever those doors open, people can smell opportunity, and you can point to those open doors and potentially invite people into doing more work, or they invite you into doing more work. So I have no doubt that this is going to pay off if I look at it through a purely business lens.
Yeah. And I think, because you said to me when we were talking about this, about the story behind it and how it's come about, right? So it has come from, like, there's a really lovely story to it, from being, my own love of classical music, being at the World Congress, coming back, and then just making it happen. And it's funny, I've just thought of this, is that throughout all my 20s and 30s and a big chunk of my 40s, I always said when I was younger, I just want lots of stories to tell. And I've had this really cool life. And I'll never forget when I was very unwell, and my therapist said to me, Ruth, you've done more than some people would dream in a lifetime. Like, everything from here is a bonus. When I was really, really unwell and not in a good headspace, in a very dark place. And so I've always been about collecting stories. And it's funny because I've just thought this now, that I think as I've got older, and perhaps not, there's not so much of me that wants to suddenly pack up all my stuff and move across the other side of the world all of the time. I've done that more than enough times. I mean, I've just stayed in the UK has been enough. But I feel that these are collecting stories, like to have this really cool story of, oh, I get to work with classical musicians, or, I've worked and supported women and had a great program that supported women who'd experienced domestic abuse and violence. And one of my coachees who's just finished another round with me, I've been working with her for 6 years now. We started in 2020. One of my coachees still gives me updates, who I coached all the way through when they were a team leader in Calais, out at the refugee camp. And I met with them in Greece when I was out there in 2020. 20 as well, like during COVID in lockdown when I went out there. So all of these stories, and you say these relationships, you collect, it's like you collect them like I collect them like a magpie, I think. They're like sparkly and shiny. And I'm like, oh, it's the ADHD in me that goes, that's a great story. I want to have a part of that.
I wonder, I'm putting myself into the shoes of someone who might not naturally have this kind of energy and enthusiasm about things, that it's just palpable with you, right? It's easy to kind of open doors when, start relationships, get people a bit wooed by the sheer amount of excitement about this possibility, right? What would you tell someone who this doesn't come naturally to, if they wanted to make something like this happen?
I think so. There's a few things. One is think about your own values, like what are your values? So often your values as well, like your character strength, and think about your character strengths in action. Like, what do you love to do? What things are you passionate about? So if this was not your, it may not be the main thing you're doing as a day-to-day job, but that's where it came for me with classical music. That's where my love for running and being outdoors has come into a year of parkrun volunteering. Like, what is it that you really love, that you're passionate about, that you would really want to be involved in? And then
which one's your go-to strengths tool? Just because some people here might not be familiar with
I use Values in Action, the VIA, just because it's also free for people to use it as a coachee. I just really like that as a tool.
Yeah. And the VIA Institute of Strength, if you just Google that, they have a free assessment online. It's not a test because you can't fail.
No.
But it gives you a really good insight into what are your virtues and values, and how do they show up in actionable strength.
Yeah, and that was one of the themes that came out of the this actual program. Sorry, I'm digressing, but this actual program was strengths and their shadow side, because there was quite a lot of I was surprised actually at how all the coaches came with bags of humility, and I thought from a performance perspective they would be not arrogant, but I suppose there would be some of that performer-esque style diva behavior. And honestly, it was interesting because the humility, kindness, and honesty were some of the key ones, and yet where they were often overplayed as a strength meant that they were people pleasing, not stepping into the light, not shouting about their own achievements or going for those opportunities, perhaps being honest with others, not being honest with themselves about what they truly wanted deep down. Like, what's your biggest, dirtiest, darkest dream that you really want to achieve up on, on the stage, or in, like being able to light that fire for themselves. So
people think of performers as quite courageous, and the strength overdone of courage is reckless, but they probably wouldn't show up less for coaching if they're already super confident. So I think it makes sense that the ones with humility would be more reflective and more open to actually listening in.
Yeah, but they all said they love this idea of strengths, because it was just like you said, there's no right and I think that's why I always love it as an introductory tool. If someone is unsure of what to do at the start of a session, I think with the work I tend to do anyway, particularly from a trauma-informed perspective, strengths work is a great way for people to recognize that they're still good, when they're really downtrodden on themselves, or their self-belief or self-worth can be really shot, is that actually there is good stuff in them. There is strengths there to be had, and whether that's an part of the first session or as they're kind of peeling back those layers, it's just a reinforcer that there are good things in them, and they do have them, and they show up, and these are important. And I always have people, every coach I've ever used strengths with, I think really appreciates that, like you say, there's no right or wrong, and these are things we've all got, and how do you want to use them and build on them? And so yeah, the strengths work was really helpful as part of this. But to go back to your question about like how would you expect someone to do something like this, I think about what you're passionate about. Doesn't have to be from a work perspective, your hobbies, your interests, what do you love to do, and then find a way to connect with. I think it's just lovely to do it from a community perspective, of like a community that's on your doorstep or part of your town, or if it is an organization that's a charity. I just think charities and social enterprises are really, really keen for this sort of work, but they wouldn't necessarily know even how to get involved with it, or to know where to look for it, or have the time to advertise for it. So I think having a plan, creating even an outline, and to be honest, you could do this through AI, right? You could say, look, I've got an idea for a program. This is what I would like to do. What would this look like? Can you give me some suggestions of what this might entail from if you're a positive psychology coach, or if you're an art coach, or whatever type of coach you are, career coach, where would this might be, what could a program look like? And, I have 5 hours a month or 3 hours a month. What would this look like? And then I think
give me an outreach strategy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's going to be a whole plan that you could follow.
Absolutely. Like, you don't have to. I think, we've had lots of these conversations. I know these are always happening in the coaching world about AI, but I think this is where AI can be really helpful to give you some of that structure framework for you. Then, if this isn't your forte, to give you a bit of a plan, and you can adapt that and manipulate it how you want. But I think if you go with a plan, that's what happened with We Are, the charity I approached for the women's program. That's what happened with Indigo Volunteers, who I approached for the humanitarian aid workers, and that's what happened with the RPS. Like, I had an idea of like what this could potentially look like. It wasn't all this is the whole running order of what it's going to work, but it was like, this is what I'm thinking. Maybe 6 coaches, 6 months, one-to-one coaching, and we just we can. There was a bit of an abstract of what the coaching might entail, what it would cover. What do you think? Like, you don't have to have it all just for initial conversation, to give them an idea on email, or if you're picking up the phone, that gives them a thought of, oh, this person's already put some thought around it. But yeah, I think people, remember the women's charity, apparently when I initially emailed, they said, is she crazy? Like, are you sure? What does she want? And they were like, the other person was like, there was a joke going. I went to the meeting once. This is a few years ago now. They were like, we were actually like, what does she want? Like, the manager was like, and the other person was like, she doesn't want anything. She doesn't want pay. What? She doesn't want paying. Like, why? What do you mean she doesn't want pay?
Sense of that. I guess people distrust when somebody's coming in, and especially in this day and age, I hear from a number of people who aren't coaches. They're like, "Oh yeah, these coaches are everywhere, and they're trying to, make friends or build relationships, and like, there's so many sales approaches that are teaching you to just, seem as if you don't want anything, but secretly you actually do want something because you want to sell coaching." And so I think there's a distrust by a lot of people who've been approached by one too many coach, and find it dubious if somebody comes in without asking something in return.
Yeah, I think it's kind of making it a bit of a no-brainer that if you've thought through your plan, and you're not after especially if you're targeting charities, social enterprises, community groups who aren't going to have any money to spend anyway, then actually what are you going to take from this? Like, how would it value you? You might have an idea of how it values you. Like, my idea was, I really wanted to learn more about the classical music world and the industry, because I didn't have that depth of knowledge, and that was something I could trade my skills for knowledge. That was the initial, like, that for me
that
was
would have been a good explanation. I think if we would have started with that story, they would have probably wondered less what this lady wants from us.
Yeah.
So I think, talking about narratives, it's super helpful when you approach someone to make them feel safe, create some psychological safety, right? To explain why you're doing this, what your agenda is, what you would be getting in return.
Yeah.
And then I think people can understand, this person actually wants to contribute because of what they've received from music in the past, or maybe they just want to learn and this is their way of learning. And so if they understand what's the exchange, then it's a good partnership.
Yeah, and I think as well, like it's been so long that I've been involved in the academic world. I think going to the World Congress was a great opportunity as a practitioner, and I think that's, when you can afford to do those conferences or to attend a workshop or a CPD, it's like really enriching, and the value you take from that. But it was here, it was that for me, it was definitely that light bulb moment of, oh, this would work really well with the RPS, because I'd only been there April, May, June, about 3 months or so. So I hadn't been in that world for that long. But having seen all this research, I was like, oh, this could be of real value to them as well, like in some shape or form. What type of coaching do they offer internally anyway, or any of their other programs? So it was an opportunity to, I suppose that was the initial hook for me. There was like, I've just come back. This is what I've heard. This is what I've seen. I'm wondering if there's some scope here to do something together. And like I've said, then the rewards are far greater or less, or less than what you expect, as in, like, you don't expect what comes out of that, like you say, the relationships and the connections that come on the back of that. And I think if you went in with that anyway, that wouldn't make sense. I think those, like being at the event last night, or being at the, all the connections that have come from
You couldn't have
this.
foreseen
Yeah,
that.
no, I think you can't. I think you go in because you want to make a difference and you want to give something back. And I know it does sound really cliche, but there was nothing more in it than that initially. And the fact that I got to kind of really have a deep dive into a world that I knew nothing, like, nothing about it, really.
Hmm. If you could go back, would you do anything differently?
I think I would maybe, I mean, from an academic perspective, and I put this in the presentation, I could have done perhaps some sort of scale at the start and the end if you wanted to really have it as a study. But as an actual,
Didn't you do that with clarity and confidence?
we did it. I did it like where did you feel you were at the start versus at the end. So I got them to map that out in the evaluation. But I suppose you could have done one right at the start. But not with this program. No, I don't think there's anything. And by not, they weren't all London centric. So I don't think, like, you could say, oh, we could get together in person. And I did have that initial idea at the start, but it just meant that other people wouldn't have been able to have made it. So yeah. But no, I don't think there's anything that I would have done differently, actually. It was rewarding, and it was just the right amount of time, and they got enough from it. And I think that pretty much sums it up. Like, it was just the perfect I was going to say the perfect program, but it did feel like that. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty good. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like that. I wonder, I mean, I'm so gutted I can't be at the European Conference of Positive Psychology. That's the ECPP. I don't think we spelled it out yet, which is happening in Dublin in just 2 weeks from the time of recording this, where I have a 2-month-old, 8 weeks. It's still very tender, so I just can't get away. Which is, there's so many of our colleagues, former students, who are presenting now and like really making a name in the field. It's wonderful. So yeah, I'm gutted I can't be there, but you have this 10 minutes. I'm wondering, what questions do you anticipate from people at the end that maybe you won't have time for at the end that we could address here?
Well, good. That's a really good question itself. What questions would I ask? Well, I think the one about would I do anything different, you've already asked that. I think could the program go on for longer? Absolutely. I think it would have made sense if there was a break, maybe over the summer, but I think you could have this as a 12-month program. What's next? I think this is kind of coming up I've got some of this on the presentation about like what's next. But the RPS are really pleased with, what's come out of this. So we're kind of looking at other ways to collaborate. So this has been a standalone project in itself, but also I think how it's given me connections to other creative in parts of the how it's given me input into other parts of the creative industry. Then who knows what will happen on the back of that. I wouldn't, maybe people might ask, like, was there any problem with people showing up? And, this I just come into my mind that, often we can think of artists as being flaky or, like, oh, lost track, like not corporate and, going to show up. I have to say, these people were incredible in making time in their diary, bearing in mind they're not paying for something. And when you've got no skin in the game, I think it's easier to blow stuff off and say, I'm not going to turn up, or I'm sorry, I'm running late, or I don't feel like it. They were super apologetic if anything did come up or needed to just shift things around in advance. So all sessions happened. And I thought one of my musicians did change into a orchestra role, and you think like there was a gap while they resettled, but I thought that might come to a natural close midway, but they picked it back up, and it was a great opportunity to continue. So there was flexibility there. I was really mindful about not wanting to suddenly start following them on social. So I kind of, at the start, I was sent information about each of them, and of course I had a look online, looked at their website, had a quick look on Insta and wherever else they were, but that was it. And it was only when that we were kind of really into the sessions where one of them was performing, and I said, are you sure it's okay? I've always wanted to see that particular orchestra play, and are you okay if I come along? They were like, absolutely, yeah, that'd be amazing. And again, quite recently, so I asked for permission before I just suddenly turned up as the coach. I know I'm not their musical coach, but for me that was an important boundary to hold. And it's only since they followed me on Instagram, I followed them back. Like, I just was really I just didn't want to be that person, and even asking, are you okay if I post this photo? And they were like, yeah, absolutely. So those boundaries were really important to me as a coach. I just think it's a bit weird when your coach, if it can be weird for people, and I think they're really important contracting parts of that. So I just didn't want to just show up. So that was part of the relationship as well. And what's next? I have left the door open to those individuals, because this isn't something potentially that will run in the same form. It was a pilot. So I've said to all of those individually and collectively as a group, none of them, I can say this hand on heart, honestly, none of them are not people that I would want to work with again, which is really fortunate. I can say this about all of them, that the way that I closed the program with all of them separately in their one-to-ones was, the door is always open. Like, if you want to come back, if you want an ad hoc session, if you want to book a series of sessions, like 100%, you've always got me in your corner, which they've absolutely loved, hopefully, as well. They've all said that's great. So that's also been really nice to not kind of say goodbye and then you might never see them again. And to be fair, I just described earlier, like, even with a couple of my humanitarian aid workers and even some of my women, one of my women particularly, who was my original coachee, they've stayed with me throughout the years and just come back as and when life has brought new challenges in. So hopefully I'll be on their radar for different parts of their career going forward. So that'll be really lovely. But if not, I'll be watching from the audience. Yeah.
Well, for me, the question is how can we get some funding for this? And this might not be a question for you, right? This might be a question to somebody who's listening to this, but it clearly had such an effect. And, creating a rationale of like, okay, how is this going to be a return on investment for somebody who would fund it, other than, better music from people who are more in touch with themselves and, perform in a more grounded way. There's so many benefits to this for an orchestra or for any type of creative endeavor. I wish there are people out there listening to this who are thinking, oh, the perfect program, we need to run it again.
Yeah, and I also think, so when I got invited to the IVA classical event, the classical awards. So the IVAs are the big music industry body in the UK, and they have the classical music awards, which is full of like famouses, and it was really cool. I got to go to, and I knew people. But I was chatting to quite a few agents who were there as well, and they were sort of saying like, well, my musician could do with this. This would be great at, you know, different points of your career as well, to have, you know, thinking about artist performance the same way we do as athlete performance, right? Having those variety of coaches in your entourage, not just those who, you know, your coach, your football coach, but also your psychology, you know, your psych coach or your mental health wellbeing coach, as well as your nutritionist and all the other people that support you. So I think there's, you know, which is probably quite interesting from last night's perspective, but, you know, just that record labels, agents, people that do have the money potentially as well to invest. And I think recognizing there is not, you know, where corporate coaching, usually, particularly with the work that I do, you know, the finance is, the numbers are very different. But I think with this, for me, it's been, like we talked about, the monetary value has been less. That wasn't the reason I mean, it was a pro bono program. I was free. And, you know, it's not dress it up as what it was. It was a free program that I gave. Obviously, there was a trade-off with time and energy and skills, all of that stuff, and their time and energy and what they brought to it. But it's not, maybe not something that's going to make you a millionaire. But I think just having, for me, having that opportunity to be a part of someone else's growth and career and is really exciting. So yeah.
Oh, cool. Anything else that we should add to this?
No, I don't think so. I think I wrote a little a phrase down, which a phrase that came out of one of the evaluations I wrote down earlier when I was just like doing some notes for this talk with you. And they said, an inner sense of worth as an artist feels more resilient. And I just think that is just pretty much sums this up.
That's beautiful. Oh, Ruth, thank you for doing this. And thank you for taking the time to let people in on a little bit more of the depth and the history of this. If people wanted to learn more or kind of step into your sphere, stay connected with what you're doing, where would you send them?
So you can follow me and connect, you know, follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn under Ruth Cooper-Dickson, or Ruthie Coops is my handle. But you can search me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Ruth Cooper-Dickson, and I'm over on Substack as well. So all of those you can. Substack is where my podcast is as well at the moment. So yeah, but
have some coffee with Coops.
Coffee with Coops, yeah, and a side of classical music.
And you've not even mentioned, did you still do your radio show?
I still do the radio show, yes. I'm on CCR 104.4 FM, Chelmsford Community Radio on a Friday morning. Breakfast radio, because of my unlimited enthusiasm and bounding ADHD Labrador personality from 7 in the morning.
Well, that's a story in itself, but another inspiring one where a burst of energy can actually, you know, and determination and commitment, you know, it's not just a burst of energy. You do follow things up. So, you know, I think lots of people have these bursts of insight and excitement, but you actually act on it and then follow it up and then commit to it for an amount of time. And it leads to all of these beautiful stories that you get to take to your deathbed at some point, hopefully many, many decades in the future.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Yannick. I really enjoyed it. And the time has gone so quickly. So I really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'll see you soon.
See you soon.